Let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining in. I've been excited for this panel all week because I think it's such a fun but nuanced and topic that's only recently kind of getting attention. But it's something that's really important. I think that needs to be talked about more, and there's women, ocean and climate, and we'll get into why we're talking about it in a little bit. But first, I just want to acknowledge the Turrbal Yugara people, the traditional owners of the land in which I'm coming to you from today, and pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging, as well as all the traditional lands in which we all live, work and play. So the reason that we're all here and we're Divers for Climate, we are not an organization, we're not any kind of NGO or anything, we're just a community group. We're all volunteers, divers from all around the place that kind of come together to facilitate these ocean climate diving conversations, which we kind of thought that was missing a little bit within the ocean conservation space. And so last year, World Oceans Week, we did one of these webinar series where we did we picked 5 topics within this space that we thought were really kind of interesting, and we got panelists from around the world, and it went really, really well. We got a really good response and the discussions were really fun. So we thought we would do it again. And so that's why we're here. This is the last one. So I hope everyone's had a good World Oceans Week. I imagine everyone here has been very busy. I love World Oceans Week, but I do hate that everything gets pushed into one week because it's a bit crazy. But so thank you for giving your time this morning. So I will just with us today, I'll quickly introduce you guys, but I would love for you guys to talk more about yourselves in a moment. We've got Carissa Cabrera, who co-founder Conservation Collective. We've got Tashiko King, who's done some amazing work climate campaigning in Australia, before with the Indigenous Youth Climate Network, and now with Our Islands, Our Home and Groundswell Giving. We've got Gabrielle Lout, who's just finished her PhD, so and she is a human rights and fisheries researcher, social responsibility scientist with Ocean Outcomes, and founder of Salience, which she'll tell us more about in a moment. We've got Cassia Patel, who is a programs director for Oceanic Global. So you might have seen them on Instagram all week, running some incredible events. They're a really good platform. And we've got Lauren Ashton, who is with Girls That Scuba, the world's biggest female scuba diving community, which is incredible. So thank you all for joining me. I know my introduction probably was not very good, so I will give you the chance to do it yourself. And I guess some of these kind of questions could have really, really long answers. So the first question, if you could briefly, how did you arrive on this panel today? What is your story? How did you get into marine conservation or climate campaigning, or where it is you are now? And I guess if anyone wants to go first, we can go there, or I'll kind of go around my screen. But yeah, how did you get here? Lauren, you're the only one not on mute, so you can go.
Oh, good. Okay. So I think for me, being a diver and seeing the underwater world and kind of being around other divers is really the way that I got into caring about the climate and caring about the environment. It resonates a lot when you talk to other divers. You kind of hear these stories again and again of, you'll go to a dive site and be like, oh, this is beautiful. And then someone who's been there a long time, or someone who was there a few years ago, was like, oh, well, you should have seen it this time ago. You should have seen it when it looked like this. It used to have this many sharks when you only saw 3. And, hearing those conversations again and again, you start to think, well, okay, what can we do about it? And what should we be doing about it? So for me, kind of being underwater and seeing the underwater world is really a route into caring a lot more about the environment. As someone who's involved in a large community that kind of can have an influence on that, it's really empowering to me to be able to kind of bring big communities together and have those conversations, and kind of same as what you guys are doing, facilitate those conversations so that you can inspire more people to care.
Yeah, awesome. I think, Gabrielle, you spent a lot of time in the dive industry as well. Is that correct? Do you want to give us your story?
Sure, yeah. For marine science, I kind of knew I wanted to get involved in that pretty young. Grew up in Arizona, so that whole entire world seemed pretty magical. And so when I started out, I was focusing a lot on coral reefs and climate change, and was very much into, research diving and diving every day, living in the Caribbean, doing that. And yeah, like you mentioned, it's one of the best ways to engage people into care. And by a kind of strange turn of events, just circumstances in my life, still pursuing that track, very ecology focused. I got really interested into these social issues that, this nexus of social issues and conservation. And it's still a very, developing space, as a lot of you folks know, but got really interested in that and felt more, I think, of a calling towards that. And being able to connect with communities and be that voice and be able to engage with them and give them that platform was something I felt like was missing, at least for my marine science career up until that point. And so that's how I got completely onto a different track in marine science. But how I'm here today is through Carissa. She's been one of my friends for a long time. We went to school together, and just one of these amazing people who's good at empowering other women and keeping them engaged, and actually just linked me up with Divers for Climate in this amazing group. So
yeah, Carissa, you had a panel recently on engaging women and kind of storytelling in this space. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and the Conservationist Collective and what it is you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Also grew up in Arizona. Me and Gabby go way back, and she was also part of the panel discussion that we hosted last week. But I also grew up really traditionally engaged in the marine science, and I noticed that there was a large gap when it came to science communication, and I quickly moved into community outreach and education. And then with the onset of the pandemic, it became really clear to me that media was the future of science communication, and that led me to co-found the Conservationist Collective. And we work with NGOs and institutions and stakeholders to help kind of communicate their environmental projects and amplify and advance them. And then we also lead our own environmental projects. I really think our main goal is to center the ocean in the climate solution space, which is why I'm so lucky to be part of this discussion today, and hoping that we can really inspire people from all different backgrounds and untraditional paths to kind of get involved in solutions, because at the end of the day, the ocean needs everybody, and I am really happy for the piece I get to play in that.
Yeah, amazing. I love that everyone so far has kind of started with this love of the ocean and marine science, and then kind of as the journey's gone on, found that, oh, there's so much more here. Because I can see Tish nodding away, because I know you started in marine biology as well. Is that right?
The ocean does need everyone. Oh my gosh, that just made me so happy. And hi everyone, Kapu Bailud, good morning in my language. I haven't actually met anyone in these circles, but I'm a little bit now fangirling. I am a Kalkalug woman from the island of Musig, Kalkagal Nation, Zenadith Kes, known as the Torres Strait Islands. And we are part of the First Nations group of Australia, where we stand in solidarity with the Aboriginal nations. And so I feel really, thank you so much for inviting me into this space. And I think, like a lot of you, like started off in that sort of marine science sort of space. But I think importantly, as a Torres Strait Islander, I come from a really unique group of islands that are being impacted by sea levels rising, inundation, and on top of our natural events. And so for me, I've been deeply connected to the salt water, to the ocean, as well. My stories are so ingrained in culture, are really interconnected with it. And so for me, it is a part of me. And so I've always had that really deep connection, knowing I belonged, with the salt water. But it wasn't until, through that, further education, did I really actually pair together that actually those that we are a population that's disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis, where my people don't even contribute to our nation's / global's emissions. And I'm picking up the burial pieces of my ancestors. And so for me, this is comes down to not only as having to be here in this space and have these conversations and educators, like exactly I think like what Carissa, you said, is about that storytelling and media and comms and how important that is. And that as while there's a lot of truth telling that needs to happen in our country, we can do this together by continuing to share our stories and the incredible strength and resilience from these communities. But anyway, that was like a lot in there. But I also, in my work, am a climate campaigner, organizer with and building up young people is an experience, and currently working with a deadly campaign that's actually with the has a case open with the United Nations Human Rights Committee against the Australian government for not reducing their emissions by 1.5, and so I really support that. And now in a new role of like the philanthropic space in Australia, where I'm really linking resources to the change makers. But yeah, that was me.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing, Tish. That's beautiful. I was so like into every word you were just saying. Yeah, because as well, I could see you were like, yeah, nodding along with everything she was saying. Can you share a little bit about you guys? You guys, Oceanic Global is huge at the moment. Can you tell us a little bit about what yourself and what you're doing with Oceanic Global?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just an honor to be in community with such fierce and badass, amazing women warriors for the ocean. This is such a beautiful way to celebrate World Oceans Week. And thank you all in your different spheres for the work that you do to uplift women in this space. It's so critical. I'm just trying to think about where to start. And, thank you for bearing with me. Oceanic Global is an ocean conservation nonprofit. And just for the context, as Yolanda has been hinting at, we did produce the United Nations World Oceans Day event yesterday, which did take place at the UN headquarters again for the first time in a few years. This is our 4th year co-producing that with the UN Division of Ocean Affairs and Law of the Sea. And this year was a hybrid event. So while we were at the UN headquarters, we also broadcasted virtually. So if you missed it, you can watch at any point. It's available, as we say, indefinitely, fingers crossed, on the UN World Oceans Day.org website. And this year, the theme was collective revitalization, collective action for the ocean. So really celebrating the revitalization, not just of restoring marine health and ecosystem health, but also revitalizing our approaches to ocean action and thinking about inclusivity and innovation in the way that we approach this work, and really underscoring through that collective action. So the need to lean on each other, the need to build on what already exists, ancient wisdom, indigenous knowledge, picking up the pieces from where we can work together in more collaborative ways, more radical ways, and acknowledge that everyone needs to be part of this. Some of our speakers were youth poets and economists, explorers, chefs, architects, really different kinds of people who can share how they are playing a role, they are using their platform, and that we, everyone does have this opportunity to be a part of it. So World Oceans Day is really that rallying cry, that global rallying cry for everyone to join and feel that welcome and open invitation. And the website has been updated, so it's easy for anyone to post resources, stories, videos, images, and events year round. There's a calendar there too, so that can serve as a platform for organizing some of this collective action too. That was a bit more about World Oceans Day, but for Oceanic Global, our focus really is on driving scalable behavior change is how I best describe it. So we do work with individuals and communities. We have volunteer chapters in New York, LA, London, Barcelona. Through that, really empowering people to step up as local leaders within their own communities and design projects that make sense within their context that we can support and provide resources and guidance to. We also do work with businesses and with industries through our program called the Blue Standard. We're actually collaborating with Carissa on some projects there in Hawaii. So it's amazing to see how destinations and islands, even countries, are taking sustainable tourism seriously. I think that relates to all of our work here, particularly in coastal regions, as we think about diving for sure. And so, so putting those systems in place, we approach more from a certification verification perspective. So to create these global standards for universal accountability, and then to offer consulting to help businesses get there, to show them how to do this, make it easy, make it cost effective, going with the assumption that all want to do the right thing. It's just sometimes knowing where to start. And the final piece there is systemic change. So how both of those pillars really do lead into policy shifts, and through that, working in coalition. So back to that collective action, one of our larger projects at the moment has been to work on the Global Plastics Treaty, which has passed the next step, but is still, a long ways from being implemented. But it is very exciting. Yes, in Nairobi, they passed the resolution earlier this year, a few months ago. And so we just gathered actually last week or the week before to see how that process continues to plug along. And even though it will be a while before that really turns into national action plans and policies, the fact that it's coming down the pipeline gives us all this extra leverage point to share with businesses, with companies, with governments, to say, hey, this is coming. You'd better get ahead of it. You want to get ahead of it. Reducing plastics is now a part of your risk management strategy. We're seeing that also for climate with the Paris Agreement and with other carbon focused reduction targets that countries and cities have themselves as well. So yeah, and I guess with that, the piece I missed, and appreciate you bearing with my scattered mind as we wrap up this World Oceans Week. I also started in science. I started with biology and environmental engineering, and felt the lack of connection with getting this information. I felt like we know the problems and the solutions. Why are they not being implemented? What's the link there? What's the gap? How do we get this to policymakers, to companies, to people? And that's why I was drawn to Oceanic Global for taking such a creative approach, working with DJs and fashion designers and artists and activists in different ways. So again, that highlighting the concept that we all have a superpower to offer, and really providing nourishment for people who want to find their way in.
Yeah, that's all incredible. My brain is processing everything you've just said, but that all sounds like so much work, but like really, really incredible and important work. So amazing. I want to get into the topic because I want to talk about it for as long as we can, because it's quite a topic that maybe us here, something you've thought about before, but not so much maybe for a lot of others in the ocean space or the climate space. And so I kind of want to start with, like, why does gender matter? Why are we talking about ocean, climate, women? Is this something that you guys have thought about before in this space? And yeah, if you kind of share what you think about this kind of intersection, maybe we can start. I don't know. Yeah.
I'll start.
Fantastic.
I think, and maybe the rest of folks can also agree to this, that pretty much the most inspiring people I know who are doing all of the most game-changing work in this space are all women. And they're the leaders that I think are kind of creating the innovative solutions and really doing the groundwork for it. And that intersection is so critical when we think about ocean conservation and solutions. I think that it's Project Drawdown that says one of like the top climate solutions is like educating and empowering women, and like being able to actually get tools in front of women to take action is, I think, something we're all doing in our own spheres. And yeah, I think you can't really talk about solutions or conservation or climate action without really talking about women leading the way in that space.
Yeah, definitely. I think, Lauren, your whole kind of Girls at Scuba is all about uplifting women in this space that's been traditionally dominated by men. Could you talk a little bit about kind of the role of women in diving and how you've thought about that?
Yeah, sure. So the easiest way to kind of start with this is a statistic, which is so PADI published their information. They're the largest certifying agency for scuba divers. For their entry-level and continuing education divers in 2020, the split was only 37% women and 63% men. They also don't actually publish it at a professional level, so we can only assume that it gets lower at a professional level. So there is a huge gap there between, the amount of women that are having access to the ocean in this particular way. So, having a community that is giving that space to women, and also trying to kind of give that space to more diverse women. So people from different backgrounds, people of different genders, we're open to like women and non-binary people within our community. So opening that up a little bit more and just giving more people access to the ocean in this way, I think is really powerful. Obviously, everybody here has incredible kind of scientific backgrounds, which I don't. That's not something that I have information on and have an understanding of on a high level. But I think there's real power in scuba diving as something that's more accessible. And it is that, it's a lower barrier to entry. It's obviously still an incredibly privileged activity, and it is something that requires a lot of money, and it's something that, if you're perhaps not close to a body of water or something like that, it's challenging for people to get to. However, in comparison to, understanding the ocean on a scientific level, it's a little bit easier, and giving more people the ability to experience the ocean in that way and kind of connect with things in that way is definitely another way to kind of get more people into this space and into climate action. But yeah, absolutely, from the kind of perspective of bringing more women into it, women seem to have so much more kind of compassion with these sorts of issues, and having more women in a diving space is definitely beneficial.
Yeah, no, I'm just like writing notes because I've got questions later that some things you just said were just like perfect. So I'll get back to those. Gabby, some of your work is on women as well. Did you want to kind of share your thoughts?
Sure, yeah. Hopefully it's not too loud with the rain. Yeah, I think just as Lauren mentioned, thinking about the dynamics in an industry for the seafood industry or for fisheries, it really is 50% women who make up these workers, and they often are not given the same status because when we think of the fisheries, it's a very male dominated industry, and culturally it's very that way. And so while I think we're talking about gender a lot more, I think that it is so critical because men and women do have different experiences and how they're impacted by climate change and other, social and environmental impacts, and they have different perspectives. And so I think it's so imperative that, that's something that really is at the foundation, not just something that is a topic and something complementary or supplementary, but really is at the root of how we're treating climate change and treating communities impacted by climate change. Women and marginalized groups, not just women, but other marginalized groups are going to be impacted more. We already are seeing that, and they're more vulnerable, and that, vulnerability becomes exacerbated by so many other impacts. And as we know, the ocean has, a myriad of things happening right now. So yeah, in my work, it's great to see that it's something that is being discussed more. But I think that like everybody said, it does have room to grow, but it is positive that is becoming this, discussing that nexus really is becoming the norm.
Yeah, so like viewing it as more of like an intersectional issue than like a side effect type later consideration. Definitely. Tish or Cassia, have you noticed something similar as well?
I'll let Tish go first.
Or that awkwardly looking at each other. No, I really actually resonate with a lot what all of you have already said. And I think for me, as I'm really hearing that, I think mine is a little bit of a different pathway. I was a little bit scattered too and didn't share like I obviously as well too was in with that marine sort of science and saw those challenges of like there'd be like a panel and people talking about women, but there was no women on the panel. And I was like, oh yeah, so this is a manel, like what's happening? And so culturally as well was that because through colonization, a lot of in cultural ways, it's still a very patriarchal, I guess, dynamic, and women often stay at home. And, you know, we cook, we clean the kids, we look after, we teach, you know, we share music, our song and our dance. And so a big part of it is also reading the ocean, because we live by the ocean, and live still off and with the ocean, is that we actually can read. And have that, and you mentioned it, Cassia, the Indigenous knowledge, First Nations knowledge of reading. And so because that we have, you know, we are part of the first, you know, scientists of the world, and that has been that intergenerational and passed down for generations, this knowledge of caring for and protecting country and our beautiful sea country. We actually know those solutions to how to look after our reef structures. That, yes, because of climate, you know, the climate shifts, you know, we're seeing that our reef structures are bleaching a bit more, and our grazing fish aren't there that we hunt from. And so we know that food security is an issue, but for some reason, I saw that through my experience in marine science and with CSIRO, was that there were organizations that were gatekeeping this information, that would use our knowledge, but not share it so that we could work together. And I think that's where we sort of, you know, hearing is that, you know, it is still really incredible, because, you know, I actually follow Girls That Scuba because I really felt like I needed to be, if I wasn't in the ocean, I needed to still feel connected. And still feel a part of, you know, incredible women changing and inspiring. And that's what was filling my cup up when I was like campaigning in corporates or governments. And so, you know, this is something that is like, you know, through these experiences and how we got here is actually, you know, all of these like intersectionalities of why we're just doing this work, and, you know, why it's so important to have women, because we've said it, you know, it is women that are leading and the change maker. And we just had a new federal government come in, and it's the most First Nations women in government. And so real change is happening. And it's like, you know, it's women that are doing that, having those conversations, you know, taking those like that patriarchal sort of like, you know, behavior and being like, you know what, that's fine. I don't need that. You know, I got my sisters with me. I've got my, and so, you know, I've got my sibs with me as well, like, you know, and so I think that's just, you know, why important is that all of this is what's going to really change and, you know, have that really systemic impact, so that we can actually have this embedded like in that, you know, global legislation, so that we can see real change and continue to have and empower our incredible women that are leading and nurture our young people that are coming up to be leaders.
Yeah, Tish, I could actually listen to you talk for like, you could give a TED talk, please. I love that you brought up, I don't know if everyone's familiar with what happened in the Australian election recently, but it was like we had like, 7 new women elected. We had like the more First Nations people than ever. And it was a real moment of like, these people can get things done. I think there's a little bit more hope in this kind of space than there has been previously. And it's just been, yeah, and it's just been amazing to watch. And like as a young woman growing up, being like, up until now, it's been a lot like, oh, is that who's in charge? Like who's making decisions? And now there's kind of hope that there are these really inspiring women just kind of taking lead and really doing it well is really amazing. Speaking of like women in leadership roles, so Cassia, do you have anything to add on to what Tisha's just said?
Yeah, also in awe at what everyone's shared, but really beautiful. I think I'll just call in for those that may be familiar, the book All We Can Save, which is a anthology from women in the climate space, particularly in the US. For those who haven't heard of it, that was co-edited by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine Wilkinson. And I can't remember if this was the first entry or if this was the preface, but essentially just saying, climate change is not just an issue that scientists are concerned about. Climate change is an issue that we as people are concerned about. This is an emotional issue. This is a human issue. This is a societal issue. And just even thinking about that reframing, I know many of us here are scientists as well, but scientists are not. This affects all of us. And I think just coming back to that emotional place is something that we are best suited to do as women or as femme identifying people, because we have that ability intuitively to tap into that heart center and open compassion heart space that's needed for this work. And so I think, I can expand upon that for ages, but I'll be brief here. But I think that's really critical. And I think it's also, very relevant to the theme again of this year's World Oceans Day around collective action, is that women are so good at bringing others along. It's not something that we tally. We don't tally the number of connections that we've made, the number of people we've introduced. We just naturally are going to make introductions and bring people together who we think would relate. And also, if a door is pushed open and we're able to get in, we're more likely to be bringing a lot of other women with us too. And I think that's just sort of the approach to collective action. And I often find myself in rooms where there are many women who lead nonprofit organizations. And so find ourselves in a room of women representing nonprofit what's the word, stakeholders, and for lack of a better term in the moment, whereas men who are in positions of power, whether it's corporate or governance, tend to be men. So you get this strange dynamic in these rooms, because there certainly are a lot of women in the nonprofit space. And so anyways, it's just interesting to see how that continues to shake out. And for those here, whether in the dive industry or even in school, I feel like I had there are many women that I went to school with, but we had mostly male professors. So it's that same question of what's happening at each level along that tier, and where is that drop off taking place, and that's all societal structures and some of these nuances that do exist. But one thing I did really want to mention is that we've done a project with the UNDP in Barbados, actually. And so this was with the Blue Standard and Sustainable Tourism frameworks that I was mentioning. And actually part of that grant program, the UNDP had metrics requiring that more than 50% of the businesses we worked with needing to be women owned. So this was a question that went into the surveys and the onboarding. And it was really amazing that was a part of the just specific intention. And it wasn't a project that had anything to do with gender. It's about sustainable tourism and tackling plastics and hospitality. And yet this was a metric. And I think that, of course, that makes, that really does lift up those businesses and just makes that part of the conversation as well. And I really did appreciate that. And we actually did a case study on this, which was recently published in a report that was just launched this week for World Oceans Day. It was a revision of a gender mainstreaming in coastal and marine ecosystem management, and brought together by Anamika Amani and others. She was actually a speaker at a previous World Oceans Day. In 2019, the theme was gender in the ocean. So looking at the different ocean sectors from a gender lens, and really bringing that to the forefront from both perspectives and all perspectives and different sectors too, what that looks like and means. As others have mentioned, there are different roles for women and for men. Of course, we need both. I think I'll just end here with one of my favorite references is just noting that we are whole people, we are whole communities, and we do need yin and yang. Yin identifies as feminine, that's the receptivity, intuition, bringing knowledge in, and yang is really that output, that creativity. And it's important that the yin comes before the yang, that we listen and receive before we put out. So that's something that I try to embody in my work, is to listen to others who are smarter than I am in the room, and to see again what already exists before creating and putting things out there.
Yeah, no, I think you and what Gabrielle, I think everyone's kind of said, I do this kind of need to mainstream considering gender from the beginning of everything, like from its inception, rather than throughout or at the end, definitely not the end, but kind of having it as this, it's not about gender, but it is, if that makes sense. Like it's a normal consideration, which I think is really important. I do want to loop back around to all of you have started talking about why women are particularly suitable for these roles. And I will come back to that, but I want to squeeze some negative stuff out of the way before we kind of get into the future of women in these spaces. what are some of the biggest challenges of women in these spaces? Because we all kind of work at these intersections of, the dive industry is very heavily male dominated, and there has been traditionally quite a toxic work culture in those spaces. You've got marine science and STEM, again, a similar thing. And then you've kind of got this weird mix of marine conservation, which, like, as Cassia, you mentioned, the NGO world is kind of slowly starting to become really female kind of orientated, but still the conservation space, especially in Australia, if you look at any leadership teams or boards or committees, they're still very male dominated. So you've got this intersection of spaces that can be quite difficult to work through as a woman of color, or as a young woman. So I wonder if you're comfortable sharing, if you guys could share kind of if you've had any experience in these spaces, negative or just challenging, and how you've kind of overcome these. Anyone's got one in mind?
I can go first.
Oh, you go.
Go ahead,
yours is better. I know what yours is. Yours is better.
So I think, and someone put it in the chat as well, Rebecca, I believe, just about that she noticed that men are running the programs and choosing how money's spent, but women tend to do on the ground work. And I just wanted to give some attention to that, because my experiences before I founded the Conservations Collective were traditionally in startup nonprofits in leadership roles, and really learning how to take up space in conversations as female identifying when you're surrounded by maybe men can be really difficult. And I struggled with that a lot, especially when I was younger, of just staying quiet, taking notes, not necessarily having ideas and not speaking up. And those types of challenges are so common and often normalized. And I'm sure that everyone can think of a situation when they will also experience something similar to that, whether it was being interrupted or being told to do something that a man would never be asked to do, like taking notes in a leadership meeting. And I think women, going back to what Rebecca mentioned, are so much more willing to do every part of the work. So whether it's the gross parts of the work, like whether it's sorting marine debris, or whether it's like computer work, doing statistics and grant writing and things like that. It's just, because of this collective lens that we're all share the same values, women tend to, I think, be more willing to do just what needs to be done. And I guess a challenge that sticks out to me, other than being talked over, would just having my opinion and my input be lighter in weight compared to a man's. And even though I might have had more experience on the project or have more insight on where I think the direction of the program should go, a man's input might be, considered more heavily, or might end up going in that direction. And it just comes back to staying confident in yourself and speaking up and making sure and kind of developing that own sense of integrity of like the work you're doing. And it's a lifelong process. I mean, no one's got it all figured out, but I think that there's a lot of opportunities for progress, like at every step in your career. Okay, go ahead, Gabby.
Yeah, Gabby.
I completely can reiterate and I'd agree with kind of Carissa's same experience. I think for me, it has been exciting. I feel like I have worked with a lot of amazing women, often full female teams. And so on one side, it can create this like false perception that, this is the norm and we have this equity and whatnot. But I think it's nice that I do feel privileged, got to pursue a PhD and now get to pursue work in this space. In the communities that we're working in, oftentimes women are not in these positions of leadership. And that lack of representation, not only, at the nonprofit level, which is where I'm working in now, and others, especially academia, which I just came from, but down to the community level, that lack of representation is hard when you are preaching about gender equity and you get to work with females and be on this all female team and be in this position of leadership, but then the community that you are working in and having these conversations with and providing them recommendations and, advancing interventions don't have that inherently built in, I think is more of the challenge that I see now where I'm at in my career than previously. And it's really challenging. And there's these, small examples of where women are leading the work around marine conservation in these communities. But I think it's just, I see it more on the other side, or like the mirror of myself in these communities, and less so I think where I'm at now, which is so promising. But it's hard to do that work and be in this privileged position and, not have that translate into the groups that you're in. So, and maybe others here have experienced that well. I know Carissa and their event that they had last week, this was something we discussed, that it's so exciting that young women get to come up in this field and feel like they belong and that they have allies in this space, regardless of what you look like, what your gender is. It's a space for everybody. And that's exciting because that was not the same 5 years ago. And it still isn't completely, but it is progress, and it is exciting that people can see that and hopefully the near distant future.
Yeah, definitely. The others, Lauren, Cassia, Tish, would you like to build on that or add something?
Yeah, I think it was something actually Tish said earlier, and you guys have echoed again, is this kind of like having a seat at the table and having a voice. And I think, Tish, you specifically mentioned earlier kind of panel talks and things like that, and lineups and that's been a thing for us in the last kind of year or so. We've seen big kind of diving shows in person coming back in the UK and stuff like this, and you'll get lineups of all these significant figures in the dive industry, and there we could count the women on these lineups on literally 2 fingers. There were 2 women, and they seemed to be only there in association with the men that were there. They were perhaps like wives or business partners and things like this, and we were just like, it's not that difficult. There are incredible women doing incredible things in these spaces, but it's just the mentality shift of making sure they're put at the forefront of it. And we've kind of like had those conversations with people that are in charge of these lineups, and said it shouldn't be on us to bring the women to you. They are there. You just need to have the mentality of thinking of them first, rather than a women's community to say, oh, what women do you have that are doing great things? It shouldn't always, as incredible as it is that we are there to be able to offer up those women that are doing these amazing things, and people from more minority genders and things like that. There are these people that we can offer up, but it shouldn't fall back on us. So it's always a case of kind of trying to remind people of that, and make sure it is at the forefront of people's minds to think outside of what they look like, and the figures that people initially go to. Yeah.
Yeah, Tish.
Yeah, I think just everyone's already like really hit the nail on the head with everything. But just really echo, like there's just, the challenge is that it's just still a really patriarchal space. And there's still a lot of work in gender equity, and especially for women. And I think, you just saying then, Lauren, like the women are out there. And they're doing the work, and we will do anything, like you said that, Carissa. It's like we will do any jobs, and we'll do everything and do it well, but importantly, we know that we need to continue to create these spaces and have these incredible conversations, and continue to amplify this good work, and like just lift each other lift us up together. But I'll pass it over to you, Cassia, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think I'll just add briefly to that. I feel just, from a more personal perspective there too, it's been interesting as identifying as a young woman of color as well, especially in this very virtual world where through emails and with lack of photo and, you know, in-person interaction, somebody may treat you very differently over email than when you meet them on a call, and especially when you meet them in person. And I have had some experiences over the past few months, even just as we're coming back into being in person, which is so exciting, but feeling unsafe or feeling patronized or feeling really vulnerable in different ways from being in person. And that's something that I didn't have to reconcile with for a while in a virtual world. And so it was easy to kind of to forget about, and having that breather and coming back to it, it just feels a lot more visible. And so I think it's good to notice when these things happen, because and it's happening to me in a very minor way, I'm totally fine, but just to know that, to then recognize when that's happening to somebody else, and to be able to step in and to know what that looks like. And I think to the point of inclusion, which is so important, and you're absolutely right, Lauren, it's not on the emotional burden there too, that was noted in the chats as well. It's an emotional burden to go and reach out and to have to do the extra work. Oh, you're on the panel, could you bring a woman onto the panel too? So now it's your work to think about and curate this panel that you've been invited to speak on. Like, no, that wouldn't happen in other situations. And so the way that we also describe too for bringing more justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion into spaces is it does take time sometimes to do research and have relationship building and really create bridges so that you know, because there is a history of colonization, as Tish referenced, and so there is a history of disproportionate representation that we need to unlearn, and to unlearn that, it takes time to bring that to the forefront. That said, of course, there are so many people who are doing this work. It's just a matter of spotlighting. So I would say a combination of those things.
Yeah, I think that's the thing you said about moving from virtual to real world things is really interesting, I think. And I think that will come into, I mean, we'll have a discussion about the future in a moment, but I think that might, actually, maybe I'll ask you now. Do you think that might play a role in what kind of now that we've had this break, and for women to, you know, all these things happening online, people can kind of get away from some of those unsafe spaces that happen in person. Is that something that might play a role in what the future of women in these spaces looks like, do you think?
Yeah, you know, that is interesting too. And and it's interesting, just more recently we had an event where there was a specific person that we had to watch out for to keep a woman safe there as well. And so those kinds of things don't happen virtually. We're also able to reach broader, more global and diverse audiences when we are virtual. At the same time, I know if all of us had the chance to be together in a room, it would just be magic and electrifying and amazing. And so, you know, there's two sides of that coin. But I think threading that and maybe figuring out which conversations need to be held in person versus which ones can be held in social media spaces or online spaces. I know many of you here are curating those virtual and remote global communities. And so there's certainly a place for that. I'm not saying like, let's all go virtual, but I think, there can be a balance there. And then when we are in person, to just have, you know, bringing that solidarity, that protection, that awareness. And to your point, if we're welcoming women into spaces, making sure too, that we're creating spaces that are safe, and doing the best we can to do that. And well, we've already noted it is emotional burden. It is labor. For those of us who do have the access and privilege and responsibility, it's exciting to be able to do that and to leave that legacy for others to be able to more easily step through those doors.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. Thank you. You've kind of all touched on this. You've really answered this question, because I was going to ask, you know, what makes women kind of more suitable for this role, or what makes women good agents of change? And you've all touched on kind of women and playing this connecting role. Like Cassie, you said before that, you know, you don't want to be asked to be on a panel and then be asked to bring more along, but like Carissa already invited people along like straight away, because women kind of play that connecting role. They do bring people in without, you know, it's just a natural thing. And you've all kind of touched on also being more compassionate. And so I kind of want to ask like a kind of different question, because this is an ocean panel, ocean and climate. What do you think about the relationship that women have with the ocean? Is it particularly different or unique, or what is it about it? Tish, maybe you can go first, because you had this really beautiful opening about your connection with the ocean. Is there something about women and the ocean that you could shed some light on?
I always reflect on this question, like, and I think this is just because it's something that keeps me still connected when I'm not near the ocean. But it may look differently to everyone, but I think this is my this is my take on it, my spiritual and just like cultural take on it, is that, you know, as we, you know, we can all women create, or those that can create, you know, the next generation, we are, you know, embodied in this like body of water, and then, you know, this earth coming out, mother nature is, you know, our world is made up of mostly water. And so then when we come to then connect to salt water, it only just feels like like it's just another extension, I feel. And I'm like, and people know that feeling, is that when you just the silence and just the raw beauty, and it's just like, how can something so amazing drive our whole lives? Yeah, it's something in your heart. I don't know, something for me. And I think that's where though that like connection though to of how maybe you know, women, or those that identify as women, you know, feel that deep connection. And I think we have that natural nurturing, and we know the responsibility of nurturing our oceans, because they play a pivotal role to our, like, to our earth. And we must look after, you know, our ocean as they have looked after us and guide us on our journeys. And so, you know, that's my reflection of it. And I always think about it. And I'm sorry, I'm like fighting a cold and I sound really horsey, so sorry that I'm choking back. But yeah, no, I have that deep as well, that I feel connected to, you know, my sisters around the world. You know, I always often say that as an islander, my brothers and sisters in Pacific Ocean, because we're connected by the same ocean. And so I feel that with, you know, with sisterhood, and have that deep connection, and that we just know it in our hearts, the role we play, and we do it. And yeah.
Yeah, I love
was
that.
a lot.
No, that's beautiful. No, everything you said, I think resonates. Everyone here was nodding, and I think it yeah, no, wonderful. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
I think that was a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Tish. Well, I'll move on, just because I've just looked at the time, towards kind of future thinking and what the future looks like for women in these spaces. And kind of how can we better support and celebrate better representation, something we spoke, you know, Gabrielle, you spoke about before, seeing yourself in these spaces. So I guess, what do you think about the future for women in these spaces? Is it becoming more inclusive? And what kind of advice would you give young women who are looking to come up in whether it's diving, marine conservation, climate advocacy, any of these kind of intersecting spaces that we're all sitting in? What would you kind of tell them? How do you think their kind of journey might look like? English just escaped me then, but yeah.
Yeah, I can start. I do think, love everything that everybody has said so far. I do think that, you know, this is becoming a topic that more folks are working on, and more organizations, and it's becoming much more of the norm. But like I said earlier, I think there's still so far to go to really get from just, you know, addressing what is so obvious about gender inequities or discrimination, to actually getting to the root causes and the things that are informal and you know, systemic. But I think it is exciting. There's one of the fisheries that I get to work in recently with my new organization, Ocean Outcomes, a small but mighty nonprofit. We're working in this fishery in Siquijor, Philippines, and it is actually almost entirely led, the marine sanctuary is actually almost entirely led by women. And it is kind of this rare example, but shining star, where women have not only begun to address environmental issues, doing monitoring and addressing things like illegal fishing. But also they still play this more traditional role throughout the association, and have these, are creating these opportunities to develop these skills, financial management, and have access to alternative livelihoods, which often women don't in coastal communities, unlike men who, affected by climate change, can leave and pursue other opportunities. And so I think there are these really exciting examples that have not treated women separately, but, as this key equal part in the fishery or in the community. And so I think for, somebody who didn't find themselves in, or didn't see themselves as working on social issues when they started out and have pivoted into that, I just think that women are inherently leaders. The way society has been for so long has made us be more fierce and more, aggressive, and still empathetic, and still hold that social capital to really drive change for not only other women, but, other marginalized groups and just communities overall. And so I think for anybody coming up in that space, I just think that your representation is so key, and that there is a space for you somewhere, which is very exciting. But there is still so much room. I think, like everybody said so many times, there is still still improvement. But I'll stop there because I know it's getting loud.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It's a really amazing example. Speaking of representation and kind of getting in these spaces, Tish, you went to COP26 last year, and I believe you were the only Indigenous representative from Australia. Am I correct? One of the very few.
Youth representatives. I'm so sorry, everyone. Wow. But I was one of the youngest youth representatives there, and we did have 2 elders, but it was really like, I think when we talk about everything like you just said, Gabby, like it's wow, it is still, there's a lot that still needs to get done, but our role really plays a massive, like, we're so critical in all these spaces. And I think that was my experience, that, despite our country, Yolanda, didn't agree to, weren't as ambitious as other countries, it was actually like, it was women actually raising their voices, and actually, because seeing the lack of representation still in those space, we need to be there. And I think that, like what Gab said, that it can be like applied everywhere, that there is a space and there are incredible people there, and I think, these conversations is actually gives me hope that there are, if you do, young people that are coming up into their space, is that there are incredible, young leaders here, women leaders that are really shifting it up, challenging the system and shaking things up to make a brighter future for us. And so, there is support out there. So, be a part of it, because it's really amazing and it's so important, you being in that space, because diversity is knowledge, and we have that inherent, I guess, responsibility. And so, and we do it well, and we do it with integrity, and we're so staunch, like it's so awesome. But yeah, I'll pass it on to someone else.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I love the support that's going on in the chat right now. Just like echoing everything everyone's saying and just like uplifting each other. I don't know if this is like a panel chat or everyone can see chat, but I just love it. I want to just quickly, I know it's 10, but I'm going to quickly just, Lauren, because yours is kind of the dive industry, a little bit different, a bit of a different perspective. I know I could talk about this for ages, but like briefly, what does future women look like in the dive industry, and like what advice do you give young women coming in now who want to become dive professionals and going that kind of direction? Yeah.
I think just in the simplest possible way. It's kind of like, go for it, and you know, find the community that will support you. Hopefully we can play some part in that, but find the people that will support you and empower you to achieve the things that you want to achieve within the dive world. There is absolutely a space for women in the dive industry, and there is completely a space for more women, and particularly more marginalized women within the dive industry. I wanted to touch on something quickly, because there are a few things that a few people have mentioned that kind of aligns with something that I'm working on. So Cassia, you spoke about like the drop off of women in ocean spaces, and also Gabby, you talked about kind of like getting to the root causes of these sorts of gender issues. Something I've been working on at the moment is working with one of our ambassadors to kind of build a big survey to try and understand why there is such a drop off for women in the dive industry, particularly at a professional level, and also why specifically there's such drop off in more marginalized women, why there isn't more diversity at a higher level in scuba diving. So we're really building this survey to try and kind of get to the bottom of those issues, and it's not finished yet. It's getting there, but we want to and spread it as far and wide as possible and get as many responses as we can, so that we've really got solid information that we can not just, oh, we did a survey and that's it. We want to have this kind of tangible information that we can then take to certification agencies and say, okay, well, these are the barriers that women say that they're facing. How can we work together to do something about it? So yeah, if that's something that you guys or you folks would be, you know, comfortable sharing and spreading that further for us, when that's at a point that it can be shared, then that's something that we're really, really keen to try and get some more information on.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I would love to. I can't wait to hear what you find and share it around. That's awesome. Just looking at time, Tisha's had to drop off to another call, but so so it's got a time to go, but thank you all so much for joining me and Divers for Climate. It's been incredible, like such a powerful conversation. I feel inspired and hopeful just listening to you guys and your stories and everything you've shared today. So thank you so much. For anyone watching, please do check out all the speakers and all their work and their projects. I'm sure you can find them on social media. We'll reshare all their links and things when we repost the recording. So please do look them up and support their work. Yeah, thank you, ladies. It's been amazing. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evenings or mornings, wherever you are. And maybe one day we can meet in person around the world in some future.
Hopefully. Thank you so much, Yolanda.
Thanks, Yolanda.
Happy World Oceans Day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.